kadar tindak balas. Kemarin yang pertama adalah definisi. Semua calon harus dapat memberi definisi kadar tindak balas dengan cepat. Oleh itu, cikgu di sini bagi satu rangka ya pada calon semua untuk fahamkan bagaimana nak tulis definisi bagi kadar tindak balas. Okey, yang pertama adalah kita buat definisi ni berdasarkan kepada kuantiti bahan maupun hasil. Yang paling penting per unit masa. If it's in English, we will define rate of reaction based on the change in the amount of reactant or product per unit time. Mari kita lihat pada contoh. Okey, bagi tindak balas yang berikut, di mana kalsium karbonat bertindak balas dengan asid hidroklorik. Jadi bagaimana kita nak bagi definisi kadar tindak balas bagi tindak balas berikut? Caranya adalah, okey, katakan saya nak ukur tindak balas ini berdasarkan kepada isi padu gas karbon dioksida. Maka cara nak tulisnya adalah peningkatan isi padu gas karbon dioksida per unit masa. Pastikan ya pelajar mesti tulis sama ada dia berkurang ataupun meningkat. You have to say the indicator whether it's increase or decrease and make sure you use the correct parameter to measure the bahan ataupun hasil tindak balas. Like now, if it's in English, you have to say that if you are measuring this reaction based on volume of carbon dioxide, then you will define it as increase in the volume of carbon dioxide gas per unit time. Now, let's say I'm measuring this reaction with the mass of calcium carbonate. Then I will define this reaction as decrease in the mass of calcium carbonate per unit time. Kalau dalam bahasa Melayu, kita akan buat definisi dia berdasarkan kepada jisim kalsium karbonat di mana pengurangan jisim kalsium karbonat per unit masa. Okey, di sini cikgu nak stress one thing, cara penulisan pelajar selalu pelajar akan tulis per masa saja, mesti per unit masa. Okey, now kemahiran yang kedua pelajar harus kuasai adalah persamaan kimia untuk setiap tindak balas yang berlaku dalam topik ini. Okey, seperti mana yang pelajar dapat lihat di sini, ada dua equation. I've given you two equations, one with calcium carbonate with hydrochloric acid and the other one with sulfuric acid, right? Okay, why I give you both this equation, whereas the reaction is the same, calcium carbonate with acid, right? Now, most of the students, they will make a mistake in balancing the equation. Remember students, when you're using hydrochloric acid to balance up, you have to write number 2 in front of the hydrochloric acid. And for sulfuric acid, no need. Now, for these two reactions, the common ionic equation is calcium carbonate react with hydrogen ion. Now, what is the difference between balanced chemical equation to the ionic equation? Students always get confused. Apabila soalan kata tulis persamaan kimia yang seimbang dengan persamaan ionik, pelajar tak tentu arah, tak tahu macam mana nak tulis. Okey? Kalau persamaan kimia yang seimbang, maka pelajar kena tulislah semua formula bagi bahan dan all the reactant and the product form. Okay, now let's look at the second reaction. This is a second famous equation for rate of reaction, that is sodium thiosulfate with sulfuric acid. Now, when sodium thiosulfate react with sulfuric acid, they will form sodium sulfate, water, sulfur dioxide and sulfur. These are the product form in this reaction. Now, I want you to focus to the ionic equation. The reactant we use in this reaction is only two, sodium thiosulfate and sulfuric acid. But when come to ionic equation class, you only have to use the respective ions involved directly in the reactions. Kita tak tulis formula sepenuhnya. Kita hanya tuliskan formula-formula ion yang terlibat dalam tindak balas. Dengan itu daripada sodium thiosulfate, ion yang terlibat adalah thiosulfate. Maka kita tulislah ion thiosulfate. Manakala bagi yang asid, ion yang bertanggungjawab dalam tindak balas adalah ion hidrogen. So you write ion hidrogen formula dia. Dan hasil yang terbentuk untuk tindak balas di antara dua ion ini adalah air, sulfur dioksida dan sulfur. kemahiran yang ketiga harus dikuasai adalah untuk melukis. This is a quite famous question, will come out in structure where students will be assessed in the drawing the apparatus setup. So if you focus to this topic, rate of reaction, the very common apparatus setup required is water displacement method. So students, what I want to let you know here is cara lukis susunan alat radas. Itu penting. Okay. Cara nak lukis ni, cikgu nak anda perhatikan kepada gabus, kedudukan gabus di sini. Selalunya pelajar lukis, they put everything inside the conical flask. That's wrong. Kedudukan gabus ni mesti half in, half out. Can you see that? Half in, half out. And then look at the burette. The burette, impossible for it to stand upright. It must be supported. It must be clamped. Most of the time students will forget to draw the clamping part. You no need to draw the entire retort stand. You just show the clamping part. That shows that the burette is supported. And the very important part here is the position of your delivery tube. Look at the delivery tube here. Your delivery tube must be inserted at the mouth of the burette. Then only the gas can be collected. But common error of the student is they will draw the delivery tube maybe half partially to the water, not to the entire thing inserted to the mouth. So that shows that your diagram is setup is unfunctional. So pastikan ya salur getah kena lukis, pastikan dia masuk ke mulut burette ni supaya boleh kumpulkan gas yang terbebas. Dan adakah saya perlu labelkan setiap alat dan radas yang terdapat dalam gambar raja ni? Tak perlu. Yang paling penting adalah pastikan anda labelkan semua bahan yang terlibat. Bahan tindak balas dengan hasil tindak balas. This one, hasil tindak balas, gas, you have to label it. Okay? So sekarang kita akan masuk kepada pengiraan. Pengiraan adalah satu kemahiran yang selalu diuji untuk topik kadar tindak balas. So, let's look at this question now. Students will be provided with the equation and data table. Now, tentukan kadar tindak balas pada 90 saat. Determine the rate of reaction at 90 seconds. So when the question asks you this, what the students have to do? First thing, you have to able to plot the graph based on the data given here. This is your data table. You draw your graph. Upon drawing the graph, what you have to do is, when they say rate of reaction at 90 seconds, please go and draw a smooth tangent at 90 seconds. Look at your graph. This is your 90 second. You go up. This is the point for the 90 second at your curve. So draw a smooth tangent. Upon that, find the gradient of that tangent. That's going to be your answer. Okay. So make sure you draw the correct tangent at 90 seconds. And then use the formula, find the gradient. And the other common error of the student is the unit. Students will always put wrong units. So how to determine the units? Go back to your data table. Look at your data table here. The data table, the unit used is cm cube and second. So your unit of calculation for rate of reaction must be cm cube per second. Now let's look at the second question on calculation. Hitungkan kadar tindak balas dalam minit kedua. Calculate the rate of reaction in second minutes. Now, when the question asks you to calculate rate of reaction in second minute, students, you must be very careful. Where is your duration of your timeline to take the data? So let's refer back to your data table now. When they say 2 minutes, but the data here is represented in second, then you have to refer according to it. Follow your data class. Don't follow the questions, okay? When they say 2 minutes, 2 minutes is how many seconds? 120 seconds. So your data range is from 0 second up to 120 seconds. Now, how do we do the calculation for the rate of reaction in 2 seconds? So for this, what you have to do is you take the highest volume collected at 120 is 42.50. You minus with the initial rate of reaction, which is 0, the volume, and then the timeline is 120. So you will get the answer 0.3541 cm cube per second. Clear? Okay. So now, this is also very common. Question will come up. They will ask you to calculate the overall average rate of reaction. When the question asks you to calculate overall kadar tindak balas keseluruhan, jadi macam mana kita nak buat pengiraan ni? Jadi pelajar kena rujuk balik kepada jadual data awak. Lihatlah pada isi padu yang tertinggi dan malar. You have to refer to the volume of gas collected, the highest, and it's become constant after that. So as you can see at this data table, the highest amount of gas collected is 44, am I right? And after that it kept constant. So now the timeline start the beginning of 44 cm cube is at 150 seconds, am I right? So that shows the 150 second is the time taken for the reaction to complete. So data yang kita nak ambil untuk average rate of reaction is at 150 second. The volume is 44. So you take the highest volume 44, we divide with the timeline, that is 150 second, and then you get the answer. Overall average rate of reaction. Okay. So now saya nak fokus kepada bahagian essay. Kalau nak fokus kepada bahagian essay, rate of reaction is very commonly they will ask you to compare the two experiments and explain based on collision theory. So now I'm going to give you the tips how to go about writing essay on comparison of two different experiments. Let's look at the first question here. Okay, for this part, I'm going to use entirely English because saya tak nak campur sebab ada banyak perkara kita nak bincang. So I'm going to do it after this entirely in English here, excuse me. Now, for this question, as you can see here, experiment 1 uses 2 grams of zinc chip and 50 cm cube of 1 molar hydrochloric acid. Whereas experiment 2, 2 grams of zinc powder with 50 cm cube of 1 molar hydrochloric acid, right? So, what's the first step the candidates have to do? They have to write the balanced chemical equation and ionic equation. Why ionic equation? Because that is the one going to determine what are the colliding particles. So students, when you write your collision theory, you must be specific in your colliding particles. You cannot use the word particle in your essay. You have to specify what particle is that. So due to that, you have to do these two. Look at the reaction. The reactant used is zinc and hydrochloric acid, right? You write the balanced chemical equation Zn plus 2HCl or ZnCl2 plus H2. Upon writing your balanced equation, use that, derive the ionic equation. So once you derive your ionic equation, you can see clearly what is the colliding particles. Upon that, go to your step 2. You have to identify the factor and then compare the rate of reaction. So now, go back to the question, look, what is the difference you can find between experiment 1 and experiment 2? The difference you can find here is zinc chip, zinc powder, right? So the factor is size of zinc. And based on your concept you have learned, the smaller the size, the higher the rate of reaction. So experiment 2 use zinc powder. So rate of reaction, zinc powder is higher than experiment 1. This is your analysis part. This is how you have to analyze your questions. Now we're going to move on to the writing the essay. So once you have draft up your points, the ionic equation, the factor and rate of reaction. So now how do we going to write the essay? The first point, we know the factor. We have to talk about the factor. Okay, over here the factor is size of zinc, right? Use that keyword. Size of zinc used in which experiment is higher class? Experiment 2, right? So in experiment 2 is smaller than experiment 1. You compare the size. Point 2, what is the interrelated point to size is total surface area. So you use the word total surface area of zinc exposed to collision. You must write zinc exposed to collision. Most of the time students just write total surface area of zinc. Okay, is I will say less precise lah. It's better to write zinc exposed to collision in experiment 2 is now total surface area. What is the keyword we have to use? Total surface area, if the size is smaller, the total surface area, you can use the word larger, bigger or greater. Okay, then only we move on to point 3. Point 3, you have to talk about frequency of collision. Now, when we talk about frequency of collision, we have to emphasize clearly the particles. As you can see from your ionic equation, the particles are zinc atom and hydrogen ion. So for point 3, you have to write frequency of collision between zinc atom. As you can see here, zinc, the particle is atom. So you have to write zinc atom and hydrogen ion. In experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. Now go to point 4. Now point 4, look at frequency of effective collision. We will write the same way as your point 3. The difference you can find here is point 3 we talk about frequency of collision. Point 4 we talk about frequency of effective collision. Still you have to mention the both colliding particles. And last we will say the rate of reaction in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. So class, as you can see here, for writing the essay based on collision theory, there are 5 points you have to follow. First, you talk about the factor. Second, you relate to the intermediate point. If it's size, we relate to total surface area. If it's concentration, we will relate to number of particles per unit volume. If it's temperature, we will relate to the kinetic energy. Okay, so now let's look at question number 2. Now, as you can see at question number 2 here, what is the first step we have to do? Construct the balanced chemical equation and ionic equation. Upon that, step 2, identify the factor and compare the rate of reaction. Now, look at the differences between experiment 1 and experiment 2. The difference that you can find here is on the molarity. Experiment 1 uses 0.5 molar hydrochloric acid, whereas experiment 2 uses 1 molar hydrochloric acid. So the factor is concentration of hydrochloric acid. And based on the concept you have learned, the higher the concentration, the higher the rate of reaction. Hence, you can draw the conclusion here is ROR, I written here is rate of reaction. So rate of reaction experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. So upon you do this draft, then let's start to write our essay. Point 1, we talk about what? Concentration. So concentration of hydrochloric acid used in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. Point 2, the interrelated to concentration will be what? Number of particles per unit volume, right? But here, class, remember, the number of, you cannot write the name of particles. You have to specify the particles. What particles is involved in collision from acid? Hydrogen ion, right? So you have to be precisely write in the number of hydrogen ion per unit volume of hydrochloric acid used in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. Got it? Now let's look at point 3. Point 3, we talk about frequency of collision. Now again, I am repeating back. Frequency of collision, you still have to write the specific particles. The particles involved here is zinc atom and hydrogen ion. Hence, you have to write the frequency of collision between zinc atom and hydrogen ion in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. Point 4, frequency of effective collision. Again, you have to write the particles between zinc atom and hydrogen ion in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. And finally, you will write the rate of reaction in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. Okay, so now let's look at question number 3. Question number 3 is slightly different from the other two questions I discussed with you just now. Okay, this is on the factor of catalyst. The method of writing the essay for catalyst is slightly different from the factor of size, concentration, temperature. So now class, let's see together. The method, first write the equation, balance equation and ionic, and then identify the factor. The factor affecting the two reaction here is catalyst. So based on catalyst, we know when there is a presence of catalyst, the rate of reaction should be higher. So you draw the conclusion, experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. So this is the draft you have to do prior to your writing the experiment. Writing the essay. Okay, so now point 1. So over here, we know the factor is catalyst, right? So point 1, please write the name of the catalyst and write down in which experiment there's a presence of catalyst. So we form the sentence like this. Copper 2 sulfate in experiment 2 act as catalyst. Then for your point 2, you have to mention what is the role of the catalyst in the reaction. So catalyst provides an alternative path for the reaction to occur with a lower activation energy. The word I have highlighted with the yellow color, that means that's the compulsory words you have to have in your essay writing. Yeah? You cannot miss out. And point 3, thus more colliding, again, you cannot say colliding particles. You have to specify more colliding zinc atom and hydrogen ion in experiment 2 able to achieve the lower activation energy than in experiment 1. Then point 4, we talk about straight away to frequency of effective collision. Remember, for catalyst, we don't talk about frequency of collision. There's no frequency of collision. We straight away have to move on to frequency of effective collision between zinc atom and hydrogen ion in experiment 2 is higher than in experiment 1. And finally, we say that rate of reaction in experiment 2 is higher than experiment 1. Okay, class, again, I want to emphasize here. Collision theory essay writing for rate of reaction, you have to be very careful. There are 5 points here for you to write. The first point, you will talk about the factor. Second point, the intermediate related point regarding the factor. Third, we will talk about frequency of collision. Fourth, on frequency of effective collision. And the fifth point will be the rate of reaction. Now, when come to catalyst, is slightly different. So when point 1, you just name the catalyst. Point 2, you talk about the role, provides an alternative path with a lower activation energy. And point 3, you have to specify what are the particles achieving the lower activation energy in which experiment. And upon that, remember, straight away move on to frequency of effective collision. Don't talk about frequency of collision, that's wrong. And then rate of reaction. Okay, that's all for today's class. I hope you get these 4 skills I've shared with you. So please try to embrace the 4 skills I gave you. This will be much helpful for you to do your paper 2 structure or even essay regarding rate of reaction. Thank you. Bye. And I would like to get your feedback in my pattern. Thank you, class.